Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of The Numbers. I'm Eric Grenier, and I'm joined by Philippe J. Fournier, as always. Philippe, how are you doing?
I'm doing better than the CAQ, my friend. Oh, how about for transition, huh?
Yeah, we're actually going to get to that later.
It's a bit too early. We'll get to that, but I'm doing very well. Very busy times. Doing all sorts of media, analyzing all sorts of polls, and I was looking forward to this one so I could discuss the latest numbers because there are some really good ones, Eric, this week.
It has surprisingly been busy, despite the fact that there's no election around the corner. We don't even have one that's on the calendar for another year.
Yeah.
But it does seem like people are getting kind of into politics again, and I mean that's good for us.
It's good for us.
You know, we're doing it too. We're going to start with a different kind of numbers. We usually talk about polls, but instead we're going to talk about the fundraising numbers that came out this week. So the big picture numbers, the Conservatives were able to raise $7 million between July and September, the third quarter. The Liberals raised $3 million, the NDP $1.5 million, and the other parties a bit less than that. Conservatives continue to raise a huge amount of money, over $23 million so far this year. The Liberals, you know, they've raised just under $10 million. It's not a bad fundraising year for them, but it's compared to the Conservatives so bad. The New Democrats doing not too bad. They got 4.2. That's not too bad for them. Did you have any thoughts about these fundraising numbers?
Here's the thing, Eric. The thing is, I think we've been used for many years now that the Conservatives always, outraise the Liberals. But this is a bit much, though. I mean, this is a big gap. This is more than 2-1. And I know it may not mean a lot. I know in Quebec, the Parti Québécois always says, we outraise you outraise opponents in 2018, you got crushed. You outraise opponents in 2022, you got crushed. So it may not mean that much. It means that they have a very motivated supporters sometimes with deep pockets, even though it's not the big amount that they can give. But this is a big lead for the Conservatives, and I think it explains partly the constant campaign they're on. They have money to burn. They have money to use, and they want to show those people they take the money from that they're using the money. So, what did you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we talked last week about, you had asked on last week's episode, which was for patrons only. So if you missed out, then, become a patron.
But it was so good. It was such a good episode.
It was the best episode, yeah.
You have to get it, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, you were wondering why the Liberals aren't mounting the same kind of campaign that the Conservatives are. And these kind of the numbers really do explain it. When you look at the fact that the Liberals have raised nearly $10 million, a lot of people would say, $10 million is a lot of money. You can spend it on some ads. All of these parties have operating expenses that are pretty big. The Conservatives and the Liberals, I can't remember the exact number from last year, but when you look at their annual filings, they're running their office is like $6-7 million operation with all their salaries and their research and all this kinds of stuff. So you have to be raising a lot of money to have extra money to spend on things. For the New Democrats, that's especially a problem for them because their operating expenses relative to their size to the other two parties is still really big. So if they're only raising $6-8 million in a given year, a lot of that is just going to keep the lights on, right? So the Conservatives have so much extra money, and when you have this extra money, you can't just spend it all during an election campaign because there's spending limits, so you have to use it. Otherwise, it's going to do nothing. So I think that's where this kind of stuff really matters because, as you said, Conservatives, I think I counted, since we first started reporting fundraising figures like this in 2005, I think there's been 75 quarters, and the Conservatives have outraised the Liberals in 69 of them.
Wow.
They just know how to raise a lot of money, but they've lost elections over that time, right? So it's the relative kind of gap between the two and also just what that means you can do with the money. And right now the Conservatives have lots of ads because they got lots of money, and it's just as simple as that.
You prefer to have money, lots of money, than not if you're a party, but it's not
and a person.
But it's not a predictive. It doesn't have any predictive value. It doesn't mean that one party outraised another that they're going to win the next election, but they could use that money for many things, such as advertising, that we see all the time. I've seen one ad, the Liberal ad, in the past week, that took the the orchard, the apple orchard from. Did you see this one? Basically, they
Yeah.
take the video of Poiliev eating the apple and just asking questions to the reporter, and they put videos of Donald Trump saying the exact same thing as Pierre Poilievre. Because the reporter was saying, "You're taking a page out of Donald Trump," and I was like, "Okay, right, this is a pulse from the Liberals," because again, we've been asking, why isn't there any pushback? Sorry, I'm just gonna move. Sorry, okay, I'm gonna say hi. Okay, and then go. Sorry, that was my cat that was about to step on my keyboard. So a pulse from the Liberals, and maybe those fundraising numbers, as you said, explain them. So yeah.
Where did you see the ad?
It was on social media. I guess it was Twitter.
Was it paid or was it just an MP putting it out?
I can't remember.
Yeah. See, that's the thing.
Yeah, it must have been the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party. It was on the Liberal Party account that I guess it was retweeted.
So I don't think that's the thing. If they have the staff to be able to put these together, but are they putting them anywhere?
Yeah.
Right? Because the conservative ads, like most people probably I PVR stuff and skip through the commercials, but I can still see that commercial was there. And they have a lot of them. They're on like sports games. They're on just sitcoms and stuff and they've got several different ads. We talked about it last week as well. They just have the money, and you know what? They're leading in the polls by 15 points. So
yeah, let's get to that.
Yeah, let's get to that.
The latest
Okay,
Léger poll, right? So we've been. I think I always wait for the Léger polls. They've been polling less frequently. I know during the pandemic, at some point it was every week, then it was every 2 weeks. The last Léger poll, I believe, was early September, or something like that.
The end
Maybe
of
I'm wrong
September,
about
yeah.
that. The end of September. So so it's been like 5 weeks. And I think Léger also was one of the later ones of the polling firms in Canada to have a big conservative lead. I remember early in the summer, around June, they still had both parties tied, whereas like Ipsos and others had like a 5-point lead for the Conservatives. Now, 40% for the Conservatives, according to Léger, 26% for the Liberals, which is like Stéphane Dion numbers, right? 17% for the NDP. And in Quebec, we have the Bloc and the Liberals just very close, 30% for the Bloc, 27% for the Liberals, that's pretty bad. And the Conservatives at 22%, which is good for them. In Ontario, 18-point lead for the Conservatives. Right there, that's your huge majority.
That's
right?
a ball game.
It's so I don't know. In the Atlantic Canada also, it's a small sample, but it's always small samples. Repeated small samples at some point tell you something. I see 14-point lead for the Conservatives. So
the Atlantic numbers, you're right. They're small samples, so that's an important factor. But this poll was conducted on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and if I'm not mistaken, the carbon tax carve-out for home heating oil that the Liberals announced was on Friday.
Right.
It was either on Thursday or Friday. So this poll was done after that. And if anything, this is some of the better numbers I've seen for the Conservatives in Atlantic Canada. I'm not sure if I've seen them up by 14 points. So if there was a immediate reaction, positive or otherwise, to the Liberals' announcement, it did not seem to help in Atlantic Canada. It's possible we'll see that this is just small samples, because we have sometimes seen some polls jump around in Atlantic Canada, but the first set of numbers from the region does not suggest that this worked. So, that's a problem for the Liberals.
I heard the Chantal Hébert earlier this week mention that there were some Liberal MPs in Atlantic provinces that were ready to just step down, that were ready to go, basically, if that didn't happen. And I think there was like almost I didn't see many smart people defend Justin Trudeau's move to carve out the carbon tax for I think it was heating oil, was it?
Yeah, home heating oil.
Yeah. I didn't see a lot of people defend it. And I remember, I wonder if this is just trying to appease your caucus, but getting deeper and deeper and deeper into just a string of bad decisions for the government. I mean, you don't want to lose your members of your caucus over threats like this, but appeasing them by this way, it could be even worse. So, yeah, it's
one of the problems I think for the Liberals too is that the kind of narrative has set in that they're in a lot of trouble, which they are, and so anything they do, whether it was because they're in desperate straits or not, is being cast in the light of this is a desperate, ploy to try to save their fortune. So even if they came up with a very sensible, good idea that was not about an election, it would almost certainly still be cast in that light. So it's almost like they won't be given the benefit of the doubt anymore by the media, by a lot of voters, that even if, I heard Justin Trudeau defending this, saying that heating oil was more expensive in Atlantic Canada than it is to heat your home in Saskatchewan, where it's natural gas, or whatever, in Quebec with electricity, and the price of heating oil has increased, and so they needed to do something because it wasn't fair. But people aren't listening, I don't think, anymore. It's just more or less seeing that this is a way to try to save seats in Atlantic Canada at the expense of areas where they don't have seats. And while that is just how politics has always worked and always will, people didn't like to see that. There was Goody Hutchings, the minister from Newfoundland, saying, if the prairies want this thing, they should elect more Liberal MPs. And everybody was aghast because she said the thing out loud you're not supposed to say out loud.
Ever.
Yes.
Are you a rookie, ma'am? Oh, God. Yeah.
And that's what I found was funny about it, because we all know that this is how politics works, right? Yeah. The UCP government in Alberta doesn't really care what people in Edmonton think. The CAQ government in Quebec doesn't really care what people on the West Island think.
Oh, no.
And the Liberal government in Ottawa doesn't really care what the people in Saskatchewan and Alberta think, where they have 2 seats. That's just kind of how it works, but you're not supposed to say that, right? So It's almost like, the quiet part loud and the loud part quiet here.
I'm guessing she will not get that many interviews in the future.
No. And she's also in a tricky seat, eh?
Where's her seat?
It's I can't remember which one it is exactly, but it's one in the western kind of part of Newfoundland and on the island itself. And those are ones that look like they're going to flip over to the Conservatives based on the latest polls that we've seen out of Newfoundland and Labrador. So
Long Range Mountains.
Yeah, that's the one, and that's like probably number 1 or 2 on the list in Atlantic Canada right now for the Conservatives. So
yeah, she won by 4 points, and my projection has that going to the Conservatives. So okay, oh well.
Yeah.
It
won't be a problem for the Liberals anymore for much longer, I guess.
It's kind of amazing, Eric, that there could be like 23 months left of this government in this fashion, in this setting. It seems like such a long time, because can the Liberals turn it around? Can they change something? Can they change? I mean, they already did the cabinet shuffle, so that's gone. But is it possible that they turn it around? The answer, of course, is yes. But the thing is, as days and weeks pass, it looks less and less likely. And yet there's still 2 years left to this government. I'm trying to find a precedent, and I can't.
Can it last 2 years? I don't can this go on for 2 years?
Well, the NDP has to grow a spine, and I don't think they can. And
eventually, if the Liberals continue to kind of have these unexpected flailings to try to save things, at some point they're going to do something that inadvertently smacks the NDP, right? So, but yeah, it's hard to imagine that this could continue in this way for the next 23 months. There needs to be something big, right? Some sort of huge policy change or new policy. Has to be a leadership change, or there has to be something. I don't know if they can just continue like this, just kind of white-knuckling it for another 23 months. But I guess other governments have done it before. Those governments like Mulroney in 93 and the first Trudeau in 79, stretching it out for as long as possible. And then eventually the government's kind of put out of their misery. But, I don't know. It just does not seem like... it's just hard to predict how the next 2 years could possibly unfold. The last 4 months have just been kind of wild.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be exhausted at the end of 2 years.
I just wrote down unexpected flailings because that's a really good and it's a really kind of way to put it. So good on
Hey,
you.
while
I think we have a title. That's the title. Yeah.
Unexpected. Yeah, that's good. I'll do that. That's one less thing I have to do after this. While we're talking about Leger numbers, so in the Quebec poll, which we'll talk about after, they did have a deeper dive into Quebec. Which we don't often get, so I think we should spend a little time on that. I'm not really sure how they did this, if these were two separate polls or because the numbers are the same across the province, but in this poll it's 1,000 people in Quebec, and in the federal poll it's only 300, so I'm not sure what they did there. I don't know if it was a carve-out from the bigger sample. Anyway, as you mentioned the numbers, 30 Bloc, 27 Liberal, 22 Conservative, 13 NDP. Was there anything in the regional numbers that you thought were pretty interesting? Because we were discussing the possibility that maybe the Conservatives are breaking through in the regions. I mean, they're doing better in the regions, but it's still, the Liberals are still pretty competitive there too.
The thing is, if you look at that Francophone number, 37 Bloc, 23 Liberal. I mean, you expect the Bloc Québécois to be leading among Francophones. This is not a surprise. In the past elections, I believe, the past two elections, Liberals have won the vote in Quebec, but it was by 2 or 3 points each time. So that means that the Bloc Québécois did win the Francophone vote. But 14 points is kind of a big gap here. And again, this was a big Quebec sample, 1,039. It says on this poll. I think they expanded their Quebec sample to do a Quebec only. So, I mean, in Montreal, you have to remember, Montreal and their suburbs really vote differently. So they sometimes on big samples, Léger will do, okay, this is the 514, the Montreal, and then the 450, the equivalent of the 905, but in Montreal. So this is a tie between the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. This is pretty good for the Liberals. It's when you go outside of that. Look at the Quebec City region. 36% for the Conservatives, 31% for the Bloc Québécois, and only 17% for the Liberals. And yet, the Liberals have two important seats in Quebec City. They have Monsieur Duclos, of course, in Quebec Centre, or whatever, like Quebec.
I think it will be Quebec Centre, though.
It will be Quebec Centre, yeah. And Joël Lightbound in Louis Hébert, who won handily in his past elections because he himself is very popular in Quebec City. But you're trailing the Conservatives by almost 20 points in Quebec City. This is a bad score. And so I think those seats could be in danger. And in the rest of Quebec, you're trailing the Bloc Québécois by 5 points. It's kind of lukewarm. It's not that bad for the Liberals in Quebec. I mean, I think the last anchor left, Quebec, is for the Liberals, right? But the Bloc Québécois is holding strong.
Yeah, and you'd look at the kind of numbers, especially like in the Montreal area where it's 30 Liberal, 29 Bloc. Almost certainly that is a lot on the island of Montreal and Laval.
Yep.
And maybe, Longueuil, where they have some seats as well. And the Bloc is doing quite well in the Laurentians, where they more or less swept. But yeah, it's interesting to see those rest of Quebec numbers, where it's 31 Bloc, 26 Liberal, 22 Conservative. It all depends where those numbers are, right? If the Liberal numbers are all in the Eastern Townships and the Outaouais, then they get to hold their seats. If it's too uniform, then that could be problematic. But
I think the most interesting part of that poll, Eric, look at that Bloc number by age. Because we've seen this before, but this is a big sample. So the Bloc Québécois, 18 to 34, 17%. You go to 35 and 54, 23%. And then 55 and over, 40%. So the Bloc Québécois is winning older voters, and we've known this from past elections and past polls. But this is a very, very stark divide. And the Bloc Québécois will be in trouble in a few years because they don't appeal much to young people, and that was not the case. This is not a perennial thing. When we say, I remember the first time I looked at polls, I was in my early 20s. I said, the NDP is doing very well among young voters, so they're going to crush in 20 years because those young voters will grow up and vote NDP. And no, they don't, of course. But this is not something that has changed. Bloc Québécois used to do well with young people, and they don't anymore. So Yves-François Blanchet and his team, they have to look at this and say, 10, 12 years down the line, we're going to be hurting.
Yeah, that's a big gap. 17. among the young, 40 among the old. They're in fourth place among young voters, and they're in first among in older voters. The NDP leading among younger voters.
Yeah, amazingly, huh? 28%.
But that's a lot of those people won't come out to vote, right? So it's a bit of a problem. What do you think, Quebec? There's a big poll out.
Well, thing is, yeah, let's talk about it, because I think this is the biggest poll of the week. I don't think we've seen other provincial polls. Don't stop me if I'm wrong, but I scanned the whole country and I looked for it and I didn't see anything. So for those who haven't heard, Léger released a provincial poll yesterday, on Wednesday. And we kind of expected the numbers, but still, when you see them, the numbers were quite dramatic. It's the worst poll for the CAQ, François Legault, since they took power in 2018. So it's been, 5 years and some. 30% for the CAQ province-wide, a drop of 11 points since the election last October. 26% for the Parti québécois, coincidentally a hike of 11 points. Québec solidaire 15, Liberal 15, Conservatives 12. So basically, 3 opposition parties are exactly where they were last year. And the PQ has taken 11 points from the CAQ. And the government satisfaction is way down to 40%. We've been used to above 60 was regular in the first term, above 70 in some polls. If it's been like around 50 to 55 in recent months, it has plummeted to 40%. Your first impressions on those numbers, Eric, what does that say about the Parti québécois? What does that say about the CAQ?
Well, I mean, it is remarkable to see this drop for the CAQ because how long ago was it? I think we probably did a podcast a few months ago, the two of us on my other podcast. And I think one of the questions was, how could the CAQ be defeated?
Yep.
And we both more or less said, they seem kind of invulnerable and they'll never lose again for the rest of our lives. We didn't say that exactly. But to see that they have dropped so quick and for all of it to have gone to the PQ, it's kind of the worst kind of thing that could have happened to them.
Yeah.
Because if they lost a little bit to Quebec Solidaire, a little bit to the Liberals, a little bit to the PQ, they could survive that. But it's all going to the PQ. And it is just a huge kind of shift that is really, I was talking about the flailing that we're seeing from the Liberal government in Ottawa. The Legault government is panicking a little bit. They really do seem to be really destabilized by these numbers. They don't really seem like they don't need to be. The next election's in 3 years. But they do seem to be panicking a little, and it's almost like being in quicksand, and you're kicking and you're just getting deeper into it rather than calming down so you can pull yourself out. And I just find that interesting how much of an impact it seems to be having on the actual politics in the province right now.
I remember in a podcast that we did together, you stressed to your English Canada listeners that the Quebec National Assembly is, in politics, the A team in Quebec. Right, mm-hmm. The federal government. When I write a federal piece, it's always, except during a campaign, of course, but it doesn't get as much attention. Les Québécois, their first government is the provincial government. I think, unlike many provinces, and something that came up is that the cost of living, the grocery prices, all these things that I think most of the country blame on Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. I know Paul Poilievre does it every day. In Quebec, they're blaming François Legault a lot, right? And I think it's catching up to him. The erosion of the time in power is one thing, but also the cost of living that's getting really hard. The housing crisis in Quebec. I mean, housing is not as expensive in Quebec as in many Canadian provinces, but it's still much higher than it used to be. And not just in Montreal in the urban centers. We've seen problems in Rimouski and in Jonquière, and where the housing is just skyrocketing. And at some point, voters turn to their government and say, "What the hell are you doing? This is not being managed well. Even if it's unfair that it's blame on one place." And I think one of the things that really is crushing the Legault government right now is that a lot of people are angry with their politicians, and they're in power. You have to wear it when you're in power. And last year they they promised checks, right? I remember that. It was such a strange policy that during an inflation crisis you would just inject liquidity in the province, and it was not a small amount. It was like 7 billion people. They just sent a check of $500 to everyone earning less than 100,000. That's a lot of people, and it was 7 billion people that they injected. And then there was one right after the election, like I think a thank you note, those CAQ dollars. And then they just said, well, we're done with it. There won't be any more checks. So, on appelle ça électoraliste, being very electorally driven. The CAQ, I think, is reaping some of its what it sowed for many months now.
We've talked about a couple times how the PQ had their support increase in the Quebec City area where there was the by-election. They won in Jean Talon.
Yep.
And what's interesting in then this poll that their numbers in the Quebec City area stayed the same, didn't go higher. But they have increased their vote primarily in like the regions and a little bit in Montreal. But there was talk in the reporting that the Journal de Montréal did that this puts the CAQ in a minority position.
Yeah.
Do you think they do?
Yeah.
Because the CAQ is still leading in all of in Montreal, in the regions. In Quebec City, they're only down by a point. I could still see 63, 64, 65 seats out of these numbers.
Yeah, but that's like a razor very close. The razor thin. Listen, we're Thursday. I will publish an updated Quebec projection. I know it's very expected. I'm not going to say who, but I had PQ MNAs write me in private, say, so when is your projection coming out? Huh? I can't wait to see it. Staff, like they're really eager to see it. So of course, since when you do a projection and there's been a couple of points here and there, it's easy to do. But when there's like a major movement there, and I look at the demographics, of course, by age and by region, like I have to take the time to really like be careful with it. So it's going to be published in L'Actualité Saturday morning. But I ran the preliminary numbers. Preliminary. Okay, the first numbers. I have the Parti Québécois in the high 20s in seats. I have the Liberals in the high 20s in seats because the Liberals stayed stable, but the CAQ has lost 11 points. So guess what? Those close seats in Laval, Vaudreuil, Hull in the Outaouais, with those numbers, those seats go back to the Liberals. And I think I had the CAQ in the high 50s. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So
I ran them just through, I think, a swing model, just a simple kind of uniform swing, and I still had the CAQ getting 67.
Okay.
And the PQ only 17.
67. PQ thing is, 67 would be in my 95% bracket. Yeah. But thing is, let's go back to the regions of Quebec here. I know again it's a small sample. Well, it's 250 cases. It's not that small. But the CAQ won the regions of Quebec by 31 points last year.
Yeah.
And now in this poll, they're leading by 4. This is a huge, huge swing. And so Abitibi, Jonquière, Côte-Nord, Saguenay, down to St. Lawrence, all these traditionally PQ areas would be prone to just go back because the Parti Québécois has not gained anything in Montreal. I can tell you this. In the suburbs, sure, a little bit, but not that much. I mean, 21% for the Parti Québécois in a greater Montreal region, it's like 2 points more than what we expected. So the movement has been in the regions, and this could cost many seats to the CAQ. So we'll see. I'm not contradicting you. I haven't run the complete numbers yet. But the CAQ has been also flailing in the past month, as you said. They lost the Jean Talon by election a month ago, and it looks like they just lost their minds over it. Yeah. And yet they lost their minds. They have 89 seats. They lost to a party that has now 4, and they're losing their minds over it.
Just one last comment on this. I find is that the way that politics is discussed in Quebec versus the rest of the country is very different because this poll was kind of hyped. It comes out, it's huge news. Everybody talks about this poll on every media platform. They asked Legault about it, and he actually says stuff about the poll,
Yeah.
about how he's disappointed to have the numbers come out, whatever. There's a by-election. People react to the by-election. They try to make changes. It causes lots of discussion. In the rest of the country, I find federal politics, no politician will even admit that a poll exists. Polls came out, yeah, whatever. We don't care. We're not really watching. A by-election happens, like, no, everybody says, well, you can't read anything into by-elections, blah, blah, blah. And everybody just kind of pretends that there's nothing, we don't know what's happening. It's just people are voting in 2 years, and that's when. But in Quebec, it's like there's a poll out, we're all going to talk about it,
Yep.
and there's a by-election, we're all going to talk about it. And I just find it a very different kind of political climate, which I find interesting. I at least find it refreshing that politicians actually engage with this stuff in Quebec, whereas federally, for some reason, they think polls are an abstract thing that people just make up. They don't actually exist, and they don't actually represent voters. This is just a pet peeve of mine. People talk about polls as if they aren't people. They're public opinion. It's not a thing.
Drives me nuts. Drives me freaking nuts. Yeah, I know.
Yes.
But what you just said, though, let me expand on that for just a second, if I may. Like you said, elsewhere in the country. The thing is, if the Jean Talon by-election had been a federal by-election, I think most of what you just said would have been true. It's because it's provincial politics. Again, the National Assembly, for those not living in Quebec, the National Assembly is the primary parliament of the Quebec nation. We pay far, far more attention to whatever's happening there than the federal level, rightly or wrongly, right? We pay attention to federal politics when something big happens or during an election. During election, people engage in Quebec with the federal scene. But something happens in the National Assembly, it's front and center. So one more last thing I want to say, because the poll, the Léger poll, did ask about sovereignty, the sovereignty question. And I think we had touched on this when I commissioned that Palace data poll. The sovereignty numbers have not really moved. 55% against, 54% against, 35% for. And it's actually, that would be a small drop within the margin of error. It was 37% last month. So the Parti Québécois goes up in the polls significantly beyond the margin of error, and yet sovereignty is still at roughly the same level it's been for about 15 years. What do you think of that? I have thoughts, but I wonder what you think of that.
I think that it is an indication that the PQ is galvanizing sovereignists to care about sovereignty again, that it's reaching out to nationalists who are sovereignists but don't care that much. It's not a priority for them, that they're going back to the PQ. I think that that's what that signifies, that there was always that 35-ish% of the population that was sovereignist, but at least 20 points of them, at least in the last election, not much of an issue. They'll vote for Quebec Solidaire for other reasons. They'll vote for the CQ for other reasons. But it feels like the PQ is being successful in galvanizing those people to back the PQ again, and to maybe believe that the PQ can form a government, that a vote for a sovereignist party isn't kind of a forlorn, kind of lost vote. I think that's what this is. That if there was a poll talking about the priority of sovereignty, maybe that would have risen up a little bit. But I don't think that the discussion about the first year budget, the fact that the PQ won in Jean Talon, I don't think that's converting federalists to become sovereignists. But it might be making sovereignists feel a little bit more sovereignist than they did before.
This is why I like this question so much, and why in a Quebec-only poll, the sovereignty question should always be there, because it explains so much. Okay, the Parti Québécois is up in the polls, yet sovereignty has not moved. This is just sovereigntists from the CEQ that have left, and I going back to the PQ, and maybe a little bit also from Québec Solidaire. When you break it down by party, support for sovereignty, so Parti Québécois is 84 and 15 against. There's always this 10 to 15 that are against, right? The CEQ is 54 against, 38 for, so plus 16. This is a little bit, it used to be like, 40-60, right? Québec solidaire, 55% against, 35% for sovereignty. So this tells me that some like hardcore sovereigntists that perhaps were with Québec solidaire because they like their left of center policies are saying, you know what, Paul Saint-Pierre is talking about independence, left and right and center. I'm going back there. Same thing for the CQ. This is a transfer of voters, of sovereigntist voters from one party to the other, more than like a hike in support for sovereignty. Like Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has stated very clearly, if we get elected in 2026, there will be a referendum. He was very adamant about it, so it will be that much harder for him to backtrack on this. We, you know, so for those who thought that sovereignty was dead because the PQ was down in the polls, I read many times in Quebec media, people say the PQ is dead and independence is dead. It will never die. Just remember this. The PQ was doing badly because it was mismanaged, because it had poor leaders, but this issue is never going away. It's still at 35%. It's pretty good, but it's way like where they need it to be, of course. It's going to make things very interesting. The 2026 election is going to be a fun one in Quebec. I know it's 3 years down the line, but this is going to be a fun election because we're going to talk about fun issues. Not just...
And it'll be competitive, maybe.
Should be.
Unlike the last couple ones.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God.
Okay, let's do some questions. And since
Yes.
we were just talking about Quebec, we'll do a Quebec one. We got one from Yared on the Discord. And we say this every week. If you become a patron, then one of the perks, I guess, is that you can ask us questions on the Patreon on Discord, where you have access to that, and we'll answer them every week. So we got one from Yared. He said the PQ has been rising in the polls provincially in Quebec. Assuming that trend holds, which federal party would be the biggest beneficiary of a PQ surge? It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think.
It's always been a double-edged sword. You would think the Bloc Québécois, but the Bloc Québécois has not moved in support since, well, when François Blanchet came on, they were in the teens, and then they got to 30%, but they haven't progressed that much. At this point, I don't know what you think, Eric. It's a good question, Yared. Thank you. I don't think any federal party is set to benefit because they're not going to talk about the same issues. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, the Bloc is at 30% in the same poll, and the PQ is at 26%, right? So, the Bloc is getting a lot of support from Quéquistes and from Québec Solidaire, so it's not just PQ. So, it's not like it's not just a 1-to-1. Like if the PQ goes up, the BQ also goes up, because there are some other voters in there. So if the PQ was at 40%, then yes, I think the Bloc would probably benefit from that. We'd see more support for them. But I do wonder if the transformation of the conversation to sovereignty in Quebec has, or at least more of it, has an impact on the federal parties, because they haven't had to discuss that for a while, right? It's been when was the last time this was an issue that was really discussed by a federal party leader? You're probably going back to the nation debate in 2006 and stuff like that, right? So,
successfully though. I mean, I remember in 2011 when the NDP went up, the Bloc Québécois started going crazy and said the NDP is a centralizing force. But yeah, you have to go back to almost 15 years.
Yeah, and I think we heard Pierre Poilievre recently using the same line he's used for other parts of the province, that the reason that the PQ is coming out with its first-year budget is because of the politics of Justin Trudeau, which, I'm not really convinced by that because Quebecers don't dislike Justin Trudeau
as much.
That much, and they're still holding most of their support. So I'm wondering how that kind of, if people in the rest of the country start worrying about national unity again, and maybe they won't, but probably won't, would they trust Justin Trudeau versus Pierre Poilievre over that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
I really don't think it's that much of an issue outside Canada, outside Quebec.
No,
sorry.
Probably not.
And you have to remember though that the Bloc Québécois could very well win 40 seats in the next election, and it won't be because of a surge. It will be because the Liberals crashed and burned.
A split.
So they could have a big split. So it's kind of when you look at federal elections since the Bloc was founded, the movement was like, oh, the Liberals, then the Bloc Québécois, then the Liberals, and the Bloc Québécois. And then there was once with Jack Layton, the NDP. I think it's just cyclical in there. So maybe it's a boring answer, but I think that's, if we see the Bloc surge, it's because the Liberals have fallen.
Let's do another one that's on the relationship between provincial and federal. So this was from Harry Bellamy from Patreon. He said, do you think that Newfoundland and Labrador and Yukon, where there's also Liberal government, will have a harder time getting reelected in 2025 if the polls continue to be poor for the federal Liberals? And he also asked if we thought Andrew Furey, who's Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, should call an early election to kind of help him avoid some of these issues. The Newfoundland and Labrador one, Yukon, I mean, that one's tough to say, right? Because we don't have any polls from Yukon. The Liberals barely won the last election. Yeah. They tied the Yukon party in seats and lost the vote. So you kind of think that they were already heading in a bad direction. And I think Yukon is actually a seat where the Conservatives could win. So
yeah.
There is a teeny little bit of a relationship. I remember looking at it a little bit before between the territorial results and the federal ones. So if the Liberals are doing badly, I think that is probably going to be hard for the Yukon Liberals. The Newfoundland and Labrador I find is interesting because when Dwight Ball won in 2015, it was just a few months, I think it was just a month or two after Trudeau won in 2015.
That's right.
And then in 2019, again, the Liberals won a minority government, and then the federal Liberals. And then Furey went for an early election during the pandemic. That worked out for him, sort of. He got a majority, but the election went badly. And the Liberals did not have the same success federally. So I think that probably the Newfoundland Liberals are going to be impacted, I think, by the unpopularity of the federal Liberals, because we're seeing it in the polls that provincially the PCs aren't as popular as the Conservatives, but it seems to be a closer race.
Yeah, you're right. I don't dispute that. The numbers bear it out, but it's also the Liberals have been in power for 8 years. I mean, there's also a cyclical thing. The PCs in Newfoundland are not an oddity. They win on a regular basis, right? So I would. Is it a correlation or causation? I'm not sure, but I think it's something that we'll have to watch. The 2021 election for the Liberals. And the Newfoundland Liberals, they won, but it did not go well. I remember there were not many polls, but early before the campaign, it was supposed to be a huge win for the Furey Liberals, and it ended up like quite close, right? So at least in the seats. A snap election, I don't think governments should call snap elections. At all.
Yeah.
Like, unless there's something major, like really big, an issue that you say, I can't govern without the support of the people. Snap elections are dumb. We have fixed election dates for a reason. I think they're a great idea, except for Nova Scotia. How can you have a law that says we'll have fixed election in July every 4 years?
Yeah.
This is so dumb. So, except Nova Scotia. I like Nova Scotians, but this is the dumbest thing I have ever seen. Like, to have fixed election in July. Sorry, little rant. I'm closing the bracket here. Okay.
So we got two other questions we wanted to do. Do you want to choose one?
Yeah, Sacha Fortin. Merci pour la question. How likely do you think it is for the People's Party to win a seat, even with a strong CPC showing? I ask because the Palace Data Polls subsample for the Prairies was around 15%, and Nanos also had something strong for the Prairies, so this is Manitoba and Saskatchewan combined. Do you think this could translate to some hardline CPC voters potentially switching their votes? What do you think, Eric?
I think that the chances that the PPC wins the seat in the next election are pretty much zero.
Pretty much zero is not zero, so you're saying there's a chance. No, but seriously though, what was the by-election in Manitoba? Was it Portage-Lisgar?
Portage-Lisgar, yeah.
This was supposed to be the seat for the PPC. The leader ran there, and he did not break 20%. I think there are PPC supporters. They fundraised like $1 million in your numbers that you published, right? They have support, but this electoral system that we have, they have to win seats. They have to win voters in a concentrated area, and I don't think they can do it. I think conservative voters who look at Pierre Poilievre right now and say, we have a chance to win government, we have the chance to win big, are not going to say, oh, maybe I'll throw my vote to a smaller party. When you have a chance to win, you go for it usually. But we could be wrong, but I don't see Maxime Bernier as, he's not going to be in the debates
No.
again. And he lost Beauce badly last time, so I don't think so.
The PPC's best ridings are in places where the Conservatives have a huge amount of support.
Yeah.
The only reason I say it's not zero is because you could have a situation like we had in the Quebec election where a candidate has to drop out for some reason or another, and then suddenly the PPC is the only option for Conservative voters. That is, I think, their only chance of winning a seat. We'll close with this last one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unless you have more.
No,
you want to
ahead.
spend more time on the PPC?
No, it's okay.
Justin Kim from Patreon said, given that the Provincial Kitchener Centre NDP Riding Association has called for Merritt Stiles to resign, what do you think this means for their chances of holding the seat in the upcoming by-election? Could the Ontario Greens match their federal counterpart and take the riding? So there was a by-election called in Kitchener Centre just, I think it was yesterday. It's going to be on November 30th. This was the seat that the NDP held. And as Justin suggests, the riding association there called for Merritt Stiles' resignation over her booting out of Sarah Jama, the Hamilton Centre MPP from the NDP caucus. I saw on Twitter that Robert Benzie of the Toronto Star said that PC insiders or PC people were telling him that, I think the words he used was, they were conceding that the Liberals would win this, which I thought was a very surprising comment.
Really?
One, because, first of all, the PC should concede that they're not going to win this seat in general. This is a downtown Kitchener riding. They're not going to win that. They didn't win it before. They're not doing better in the polls than they did last time. But the Liberals, I don't know why the Liberals would win this.
I'm looking
You have
at
a thought?
Well, I have a thought. I'm looking at the history of this riding, provincially, of course. The Liberals won in 14 with Miss Wynne. 40% of the vote against 27% for the NDP. Then the NDP took it, 43%, then 41%. The Liberals didn't break the 15% mark in the last election. And the last election was June last year. So it's not that far away. And I look at the Conservative number, 25, 28, 27. So, yeah, the Conservatives conceding that they're not going to win, but they still have a quarter of the vote. Unless they decide to stay home or switch their votes, I don't know. The Greens had 13%. So could they match their federal counterpart? Here's the thing, though. Let's remember that why Mike Maurice won. There was no Liberal candidate. So I don't want to take anything away from Mr. Maurice. He won it fair and square. But he did not have a Liberal candidate against him. So the Greens would have to go from 13% and beat the NDP that had 41% just a year and a half ago. It seems like a big step. It's possible, and I think I will probably get some local polls. I know Main Street usually does those by-elections, especially in Ontario. But it seems like a big step for the Greens to take.
Yeah, it does. But, maybe I think they'll do probably a lot better. They've been putting a lot of resources into that. They do have the federal MP. It's true that the voters might have done it for different reasons, but I think that probably gives the Greens a lot more credibility. And the fact that the NDP seems to be eating itself alive over this, I can't see how that does anything but hurt, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you have three parties
in the high 20s
clustered around 30%, and flip a coin who ends up winning this. But I don't see why the Liberals would win this.
Are we going to do a live stream for this one?
Oh, I don't know.
I should have asked you this before, huh?
Yeah.
The
last one we did didn't get a huge amount of people. I think Ontario provincial by-elections might be kind of low on the priority list.
Well, I think Ontario elections are really low on the list of priorities of Ontarians. Sorry. I'm still bitter about that.
Yeah, clearly. You mention it every time.
43% turnout. Come on, people. Jesus Christ. Anyway.
Okay.
I have a quiz for you, my friend.
Yes, you have a quiz for me.
I have
so last episode, I had a quiz for Philippe.
Yep.
And he managed to win it, so that was great for him. So now I'm going to try to match his record. All right, what do you got?
So the Quebec poll the Quebec quiz that you had for me last week, I have to say, there were some lucky breaks in there. the guesses.
You got to
of
get the right
seats.
bounces. That's how you win.
That's right. Okay, so this is a bit different. All right, so here's how it's going to work. I'm going to do my thing where I called for the music. There you go. So I'm going to it's a game of MPs in the 2021 election. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to give you 3 MPs and their ridings. And you have to pick among the 3 who had the highest share of the vote. Okay? But it's not that simple, because if you don't get it right, it's okay. I'm adding the totals. There are 10 rounds. It's going to go fast. There are 10 rounds. And at the end of those 10 rounds, you have to reach 500 points. So an average of 50% of the popular vote for each one. In every round, there's at least one MP that got at least 50% of the vote. And I'm going to add it up. I'm going to tell you though, I added up with the rounded numbers, so the closest integer. And I have an Excel spreadsheet all ready for you, so you don't have to do the math, right?
Okay, I'm going to rely on you because I don't quite understand, but whatever. I'll choose whatever.
You don't?
I'll choose whatever I think is correct.
Okay, so basically, let's do the first round and we'll see how it goes. So,
okay,
you have 3 choice of those 3. So, the Liberal Yvonne Jones in Labrador, or the blockist Sébastien Lemire in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, or the Conservative Richard Lehoux in Beauce. Which of these 3 do you think had the highest share of the vote in their riding?
I'm going to guess that it was Yvonne Jones in Labrador. I think the other 2 were probably in the 40s.
So I'm punching your choice of Yvonne Jones. Yvonne Jones had the smallest share of the vote of those 3.
Oh,
it
boy,
was
that's
40.
bad.
So it was 43%. You have to get at least 50 each round to get the 500 points. You got 43 on this one. Okay. Round number 2.
Well, who had the most on that one? You didn't say.
It was Sébastien Lemire. He had 51% of the vote, the
Okay.
blockist, right?
All right.
And Richard Lehoux had 48%. Okay.
Okay.
Round number 2. Marie-Claude Bibeau, the Liberal in Compton Stanstead in the Eastern Townships. Luc Thériault, the blockist in Montcalm. Or Alexandre Boulris, the Dipper in Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Who among these
that's
3
tough.
had the highest share of the vote?
I think it is going to be. To me, it's either between Boulris or Thériault. I know that Montcalm is one of the safest kind of blockist ridings in all of Quebec.
The
so I'm going to say it
blockist.
was. It's the most. Yeah, it's the blockist. It's the blockist riding. I'm going to say it's Luc Thériault in Montcalm.
And you would be correct. Luc Thériault had 53%, so I'm going to punch a number. So you are at 96 points, and your expected number is 100 after 2. So you're just below the mark, all right?
Got it.
Round number 3. We're going halfway Ontario and Quebec now. Justin Trudeau, you may have heard of him, the Liberal, in Papineau. Or Ryan Williams, the Conservative, in Bay of Quinte. Is that how you say it? Bay of Quinte?
Bay of Quinte, yeah.
Bay of Quinte, okay.
I
And
think
then
it's Quinte,
Karina Gould, the Liberal, in Burlington. Who had the highest share of the vote among those 3?
I think this is a trick question because I think it should be. Yeah, I think out of them, I think it is Justin Trudeau, even though it feels like that's a trick. So I'm going to say it's Justin Trudeau in Papineau.
And it is Justin Trudeau. He had 50.3% of the vote in Papineau. So you're at 146, just below the 150 line. Round number 4. Alex Ruff, the Conservative, in Bruce Grey, Owen Sound. Eric Melillo, the Conservative, in Kenora. Or Judy Sgro, the Liberal, in Humber River, Black Creek.
These are really tough because these are all. We don't pay attention to these ridings, right?
And these are all winners. These are all people that won. I mean, I considered taking some candidates that lost, but I figured, oh no, let's just stick
that'd
to
be
the
too
winners.
easy. But Melillo, I remember winning in Kenora was a bit of a surprise when he first took that seat. But I think it's going to be Judy Sgro. I think the Liberals do so well in those areas that I'm guessing it's her that got that score in that Toronto riding.
Is that what your final
Sgro,
answer?
yes, Judy Sgro.
And
yes.
that is the correct answer. She had 61% of the vote in that riding. The other 2 did not break 50%. So you are at 207, above the 200 mark. Round number 5.
Okay.
Now at number 5. Valerie Bradford, the Liberal in Kitchener South Hespeler. Helena Hajek in the Liberal in Markham Stouffville, which I called Stouffville for the longest time. Or Tony Baldilani, the Conservative in Niagara Falls.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it's not Kitchener South Hespeler because that was one of those really close ridings, and I think that was one of the ones where if the PPC hadn't been there, the Liberals, the Conservatives could have won it. So that tells me that she didn't get over 50. For the other two, it was Niagara Falls, and what was he? And
Helena Hajek in Markham Stouffville.
Markham Stouffville. I think it's going to be Niagara Falls.
Tony Baldinelli in Niagara Falls had 38% of the vote.
Wow. Yikes.
It was a kind of a trick one because Valerie Bradford, you're right, also had 38%. Madame Hajek got 51%.
Wow. Okay.
So
That was bad on
your
me.
total right now is 245. Your expected is 250. Round number 6. Melissa Landsman, the Conservative in Thornhill. Patty Haydu, the Liberal in Thunder Bay Superior North. Or Carolyn Bennett, the Liberal in Toronto St. Paul's.
Oh boy, I think it's got to be. I think we underestimate, in general, just how well the Liberals do in Toronto. So I'm going to say it was Carolyn Bennett in Toronto St. Paul's.
This is the middle one, but it's still a pretty good answer. Melissa Landsman had 51% of the vote, and Carolyn Bennett had 49% of the vote. So you get the middle one, which is okay. It's not bad.
Okay.
So you're at 294, and the expected
Right.
line is 300. So you're just under.
Okay.
We are going out west, my friend. Nikki Ashton, the NDP from Churchill, Kiwatinook-Aski. Dan Vandal, the Liberal in Saint-Boniface, Saint-Vital. Or Dan Mazier, the Conservative in Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawa.
Okay. Jeez. To me, it's between Ashton and Dauphin Swan River. I'm gonna say the Conservative. It's the safe vote, rule riding.
Dan Mazier in Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawa. That would be the highest of the three, 59% of the vote.
Okay.
So you're at 353, expected line at 350. You're doing okay.
Catching up.
All right.
Okay.
Three rounds to go. Round number 8. We're going into Saskatchewan. Jeremy Patzer, the Conservative, well, they're all Conservatives, in Cypress Hill Grassland. Warren Steinley, the Conservative, in Regina Luvan. I'm not sure I pronounced that. Sorry about that. Or Robert Kitchen, the Conservative, in Surrey Moose Mountain.
I'm pretty sure. Okay, well, I know it's not going to be Regina because Cypress Hills Grassland and Souris Moose Mountain.
Is it Souris? Is it?
I think it's Souris.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know. It's Souris in some places. It's Surrey in others. There's one in PI in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Cypress Hills Grassland is the strongest one. Oh God, it could be the other one. Cypress Hills.
All right, Jimmy Pastor in Cypress Hill Grassland. It's the second one, but it's still 72% of the vote. I gave you a free
This was my
one.
chance to catch up.
Yeah, and you did catch up. You're at 425, and the expected is 400. I think you're looking good here, unless you
The top
trip
one
up.
was Souris Moose Mountain, right?
Yes, it was 76% of the vote. Okay, we're going to Alberta. I think you're going to win this. Looking at the numbers now. Okay, round 9, Alberta. Michelle Rempel Garner, the Conservative in Calgary Nose Hill. Blake Desjarlais, the NDP in Edmonton Griesbach. Griesbach.
He's Greaseball.
Griesbach. Anyway, you know. Or John Barlow, the Conservative in Foothills.
Oh, that's easy. Foothills.
It is Foothills.
Come on.
69% of the vote, and you're at
Only 69.
Only 69 is yeah. He didn't work really well to it. So you're at 494 right now. So I think you're gonna win because
I'm gonna do it. Okay.
Yeah, you're gonna
I
win.
want to clear the bar. I want to be a lot of space between me and that poll. I want to do it.
Last
Come on,
round, we're going into BC for this one. Jagmeet Singh, NDP in Burnaby South. Jenny Kwan, the NDP in Vancouver East, or Brad Viss, the Conservative, in Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon.
Okay, it's definitely not Singh, because I think he got like 38 or 42 or something like that. I think Vancouver East is pretty much one of the safest NDP ridings, but Mission Matsqui, I'm going to say it is Vancouver East and Jenny Kwan.
And you are correct. 56% of the vote, and your total is 550. You had to clear the 500-point mark, so you win the quiz. Let's get some applause here. Just for fun, though. Just for fun. I had a random generator work that boat just to make sure it was feasible. So basically, it just picked randomly 1, 2, 3 for each round. And the random generator won 38% of the time. So it was not that hard, but you could not miss that. I mean, the Saskatchewan one, I mean, it was 76, 72, and 47. So it was a generous one. But you did very well. You got the highest in the 6 of 10. You had the highest. So
okay, well, that's a pass.
That's
at
a
least.
pretty good. Yeah, congratulations, Eric. You win the quiz this week. So
thank you. Okay, well, after we we'll work on getting the quizzes to be harder in the future. We'll get to our number of the week. Here, I'll go first, if you don't mind. My number is, going back to what we discussed at the beginning, it's 13.5 million. So it's the big number that I'm going for this week. That's the gap in fundraising between the Conservatives and the Liberals so far in 2023. That is the biggest gap over the first 9 months of any year since records kind of begin in 2005. The previous record was 11.2 million in 2008, and that was obviously a bad election for the Liberals. So it's now 13.5 million, and that is a huge amount of money that you can blow on whatever the hell you want if you're a political party. So that's my number of the week.
very good. My number of the week, 75. This is the percentage of Liberal voters who are satisfied with the Liberal government. And if you think it's high, it used to be much, much higher. It used to be in the high 80s and sometimes the low 90s. So that tells me that 1/4 of current Liberal voters, according to Léger, in the latest Léger poll, are not happy with the direction of the government. And when you look at the others, NDP, it's 2-1 dissatisfied. Bloc is 3-1 dissatisfied, and even the Greens, it's a small number, but it's 2-1 dissatisfied. So the Liberals are in a corner right now, and 23 months to go to this government, unless.
Unless, yeah, we'll see. Okay, well, if you don't want to miss next week's episode of The Numbers, you can head to our Patreon page at thenumberspod.ca. If you become a member, you'll get access to The Numbers every week on Thursdays, including exclusive episodes every 2 weeks. And you get to participate in our Discord, where we are chatting about politics and soliciting questions for the weekly mailbag. And if you're already a member of our Patreon, and that number keeps on ticking up, and we appreciate it, thank you very much. Philippe, hope you have a great weekend. My cat is making some noises. Maybe she's yawning.
Is she
okay?
okay?
She's dreaming. She's dreaming.
Oh.
She's dreaming about our next episode next week, and I'm going to be looking forward to it too.
Because
Thanks,
it will
so
be
much,
for
Philippe.
it will be for members only. So if you want to
Yeah.
have the episode, please register and support Eric and I in this work. We love doing this, and also Eric and I love reading and interacting with our members on the Discord. The Discord has turned into a really fun place where
Yeah.
people argue about politics, and everybody so far has been quite nice. They play nice, and it's a fun place to go. So please register, become a member, so you can have access to that. Merci beaucoup, Eric.
All right, see you next week, Philippe. Terrific.